frantic, unsettling island drama. The epic people's uprising in Sri Lanka.
The police is firing on the protesters. They were suddenly started marching toward the Prime Minister's residence.
We're currently outside the Prime Minister's office, and currently what is happening here is that
Pramod and Ashutosh at every site.
Similar pictures we are seeing at Ground Zero here in Colombo.
these were the protesters who were at Calface earlier, and now they're trying to move away from this place.
Relentless, fearless, live reportage. Zero compromise, zero rest. Amidst the rebels, tear gas and crowds. India riveted to India Today TV coverage. Pramod and Ashutosh live from Lanka. Co-powered by Solar Hai Lagana to Luminous Ko Bulana. In association with the new Volkswagen Virtus.
Big diplomatic win for India in the United States. US all set to give India a huge waiver. US won't sanction India for Russian defense deals. US wouldn't dare, but now it's becoming official. Trump-era threat to get grand burial. India to get free pass from US sanctions. The waiver is in sight, and it's already a huge diplomatic victory for India's foreign policy and the efforts of many nameless, faceless diplomats who have been toiling for years to get this nailed for India. And I'm going to decode this entire big day for you here on 5 Live. I'm Shiv Aroor. These are the headlines. Showdown over namaz at a Lucknow Lulu Mall peaks. Hindu groups seek permission to recite Hanuman Chalisa inside the mall. Security has been beefed up. The mall says no more worship inside. Ajmer Dargah cleric Gauhar Chishti, who raised the Sartan Se Juda call against Nupur Sharma, has been nabbed from Hyderabad. Cops are looking into a Popular Front of India link. Big showdown ahead of the monsoon session of Parliament. Opposition slams no protest in Parliament notice, says nothing is going to stop them from protesting. Sensational twist of former Vice President Hamid Ansari's alleged links to Pakistan spy journalist Nusrat Mirza. Former jurist Adish Agarwala tweets pictures of Ansari and Mirza sharing stage in 2009. BJP hits out. Former Vice President denies all allegations. Sri Lanka Speaker announces resignation of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who has fled to Singapore. Protesters celebrate new president to be appointed on the 22nd of this month.
These are the delicacies of Sri Lanka, called as milk rice, and this is the way they are celebrating their former president, Gotabaya Rajapaksa's resignation.
Today is a very big day for Indian diplomacy and a very big day for India-US relations. During the Trump era, a law was created by the United States to punish countries, its allies and partners, who dared to do business, especially defense business, with countries like Russia, North Korea, etc. India, as you know, has been doing business with Russia for many, many years. It's a relationship that in many ways predates our relationship with the United States. And after the threat of those sanctions has loomed large over India for the last 4 years, today the United States politicians, in a bipartisan manner, voted to set the ball rolling to give India a unique, world-exclusive waiver. Only India could have achieved this. It's India's biggest ever weapons contract with Russia. The multi-billion-dollar deal for the S-400 air defense missile system. Signed 4 years ago, these formidable weapons have begun delivery to India. But right through their journey, there's always been the shadow of threat. The threat of sanctions from the United States, a country that does not appreciate its allies and partners dealing with its adversaries. But the draconian Trump-era legislation that has shadowed India's defense dealings with Russia has finally crashed and burned. The US House of Representatives has just voted to clear the decks for a one-of-a-kind India-specific waiver to the punishing provisions of CAATSA, which stands for Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act.
Ranking Member Rogers for making this amendment truly bipartisan.
The threat of this legislation had become a stubborn sticking point in India-US ties after the S-400 deal was signed, with sections of the US political system actively pushing for India to be punitively sanctioned. But the amendment pushed by Representative Ro Khanna clears the most difficult hurdle towards this waiver.
There is no relationship of greater significance to the United States strategic interests than the U.S.-India partnership. It is necessary to affirm democracies. It is necessary to stop China's border aggression. It's necessary for us to lead in critical technologies. This gives a sense that while we're building this relationship, we should not be sanctioning India under CAATSA, and it also will help facilitate the India getting more of their defense from the United States and not Russia.
The Khanna amendment will affirm the United States partnership with India and push the Biden administration to use its authority to help India deter aggressors like China. Once official from the White House, the CAATSA waiver to India will be every bit as significant as the India-specific waiver that the Manmohan Singh government won from the US-led nuclear suppliers group many years ago, paving the way for the Indo-US civil nuclear agreement. Stay with India Today's coverage as we decode the big diplomatic victory amidst a world that has changed dramatically. Bureau Report, India Today. So let's now decode precisely what that amendment has inside it. There are 4 basic points that this amendment has. Remember, the waiver is in sight. This was the most difficult hurdle to cross, and it has happened, which basically means it's as good as done, but it will come in the future. The first point is this is to advance Indo-US ties in the Indo-Pacific, is what this amendment document says, to push for joint defense projects in critical technology areas which have been identified by both sides. This waiver is also on weapons to defend against China. That's one of the reasons why the United States has agreed to provide this one-time waiver to India. No sanctions against India for dealing with Russia and buying the S-400, but the amendment says the United States will try and convince India to stop using Russian equipment and instead start using US equipment, which it has anyway already started doing in a big way. But why is this so important? Why am I here calling it a big diplomatic win for India? Number one, this waiver is looming in front of India at a time when the Russia-Ukraine war is peaking, when Russia has been painted as enemy number one of the world by the United States, and yet they're giving India this waiver, or at least intending to. It validates the strength and the ability of India's foreign policy under a great deal of foreign pressure. The waiver to India has been provided to no other country. No other country has received this kind of waiver. It's totally unique to India and underscores India's unique position in the world. Remember, the S-400 missile deal that India struck with Russia was the precise deal that had the threat of sanctions. Now those sanctions will not be applied if this goes through, and there's no reason why it won't. And finally, India's age-old Russian defense ties stand undisturbed and unhindered and unthreatened by this whole thing. Basically, the United States has said, we trust India's independence in defense contracting, we affirm it, and we will not interfere in it by assigning sanctions of any kind. So what we've got here is a situation where President Biden, who has inherited a Trump-era law to punish US partners and other countries that dare to do business with Russia, North Korea, and other American adversaries, India has completely dodged the provisions of those sanctions. There was always a view that the India-US relationship was way too deep and way too complex for the sanctions of this kind to ever be applied. But remember that in 1998, when India tested a nuclear device, sanctions were applied against India. So it's not like the United States has never applied sanctions against India. And that's the reason why the US House of Representatives voting to provide India this unique waiver from sanctions is such a big diplomatic coup. We're going to get deeper into this. Our National Bureau Chief Abhishek Bhalla is with me live on this momentous story. Abhishek, how significant is this? You know, because for 4 years now, the sword of CAATSA, these punitive sanctions have hung over India's head. You know, there was never a sense that it would be a great threat, but given that the United States has sanctioned India in the past, anything could possibly have happened. How significant is this in your view, Abhishek?
Big relief, Shiv, and it seems that the decks are cleared as far as any US sanctions are concerned for the purchase of S-400 that India has made. We need to understand how important the S-400 is for India. In fact, the deliveries have already started. The first unit has been delivered, and it's already, being used at the Western Front, somewhere in the Punjab sector. The next 4 units have to come. Russia has made it clear that even during the Ukraine war, despite the war, the deliveries will not be delayed. So it's a pretty clear situation that India will soon have all units of the S-400, the potent, deadly air defense system that India has been wanting in its armory. And it's finally that moment where there is no threat of sanctions, and these units can be delivered quickly, and India will be much better prepared.
And this is the waiver that India stands to get now. The biggest hurdle has been crossed. Ahead will be that waiver which will be provided to India. It's a really big deal because this is a draconian law. And a waiver of that law is going to be provided to India. Let me just give you a sense of the provisions of CAATSA. CAATSA stands for Countering American Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. That's what CAATSA stands for. It is structured as a punitive legislation to punish countries economically for daring to do business with countries like Russia. India is going to get a waiver from this. Sanctions transactions with Russia, North Korea, and Iran, the big 3 so-called enemies of the United States. It did stand to affect India's S-400 missile deal with Russia, but now this waiver, as Abhishek just pointed out, completely clears the decks. Transactions are not going to be affected, and the US is exempted, under the rules of CAATSA, which was formulated by the Trump administration when it came into effect in 2017. Abhishek, not the first time that the threat of sanctions is hung over India's head. Also, not the first time that India has been provided with a unique waiver the first of its kind and only one of its kind in the world. I remember in the 2000s when the Manmohan Singh government had obtained, the famous nuclear suppliers group waiver as well from the United States, paving the way for the Indo-US civil nuclear deal. This, when it finally happens, will be every bit as significant as that one.
Yes, Shiv, and there has been precedent, as you pointed out, and there are two things that need to be noted. For the same purchase of S-400, Turkey has faced sanctions from the United States in 2020. And, when this amendment was being moved in the US, there was a mention of China as well. So, the world is aware that, to deter China, you cannot, reach a situation where India feels like an aggrieved party. And that's something that US has been looking at very closely. So it's advantage both India and US. It's not as if US is doing any big favor to India. They understand the geopolitical implications of these sanctions. And that's the reason why, China was mentioned while this was being discussed.
It's a very big day. We're going to decode it further. The details of this entire amendment are still becoming clear. But Abhishek, thanks very much for joining us in this developing, unfolding story. Big diplomatic win for India. And joining us live on our coverage now is Ambassador Navtej Sarna. He's former Indian ambassador to the United States, one of the most prominent and well-known former diplomats. Ambassador Sarna, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you for your time and for being with us and helping us understand, what is being seen as the first step towards a major diplomatic victory. How significant is this, Ambassador? The US House of Representatives voting to, set the ball rolling, as it were, towards that big waiver on the CAATSA Act against India.
Well, thank you, Shiv, for having me on your show. Let me try and put this into perspective.
Yes.
That this is it's an important step on the way to an ultimate waiver for India's purchase of Russian weaponry. It's not the final waiver, from what I understand.
Yes.
And how this happens is that there is this, the CAATSA law, which was essentially a law put to impose sanctions on any country which has important strategic or defense engagement with Russia, with Iran, with North Korea. And it was essentially meant to stop that sort of engagement. In 2018, a waiver provision was added to the CAATSA, but that was not an India-specific waiver. It essentially was pushed for India, but it was not an India-specific waiver. And it essentially said that gave the administration the option to give a waiver in case they felt that a relationship was working strategically for the United States, that that country which was being targeted with sanctions was trying to move away from Russian weaponry, and a couple of other caveats. Now, Congressman Ro Khanna's amendment now adds on to that process and makes an India-specific case, which will ultimately make it easier for the administration. They can already do it, but now this gives them an added possibilities, knowing that the Congress or the House certainly so far is with them on this. So if they choose to give a waiver, it makes it much easier for them.
Ambassador Sarna, you've been the Indian ambassador to the United States, so you've been up close with decisions of this kind in the past as well. My second question to you, sir, is in the world as we know it right now, when Russia is being looked at by the United States as a threat to the world in the context of what's happening in Ukraine, do you see any significance of this waiver, or at least the process towards that waiver, coming at this time, sir?
I think it's important because it underlines the importance of India-US strategic partnership.
Yeah.
And says that this is an important partnership. It is so important that we can't harm our own interests just to spite Russia. The second aspect that is highlighted is that America, the United States and India are making common cause against China. Now, if you see Congressman Ro Khanna's amendment, it
Yes.
specifically mentions that, in the Indo-Pacific, the India-US partnership is of great strategic importance. And that clearly it means that it is China. And secondly, it also states in clear terms that India is facing Chinese aggression on its borders. And it's
Yes.
important for the United States to support India's defense. It also underlines that India and the US are cooperating in critical and emerging technologies, like artificial intelligence and other cutting-edge technologies. And it shows that you can't be cooperating with a country to that extent in these crucial days when, the Chinese are clearly becoming very aggressive, both towards India and to the rest of the world, as
Yes.
well as given the Russia-China partnership. So in this way, they need this partnership, the United States. It's in US's interest to grant India this waiver.
In your view, why has it taken this long, Ambassador? Because, this act, the shadow of these sanctions began under the Trump administration. How would you read the fact that it has taken its time for it to actually reach this place? Because like you said, the India-US relationship is a deep and an expansive relationship. So one wonders why it took so long.
No, I don't think you should see this in kind of, a discrete event that has happened now. We must remember 2017, the CAATSA was passed. Immediately there was wonderment that, what will happen to the India-US defense relationship. On the one hand, India-US defense relationships has grown in the last 10, 12 years from virtually zero to $20 billion. And we are flying 3 US aircraft and various other things. We have signed the foundational agreements. So that is why the 2018 provision, which was essentially championed by Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, actually took place. And then as a natural progression, India being the only country which is designated as a major defense partner by the United States, this has happened. And again, I must reiterate, this is not the final station. As and when the US takes an administration decision on waiver, this will help them. So this is a constant, it's a constant movement of the process.
Ambassador, just 2 more questions. One of the points that was there in the text of this amendment is, that while this amendment does look at India's dealings with Russia as part of its own national defense and, defending its territory against China. It also talks about trying to persuade India away from Russian, systems and weaponry and onto US weapons. Do you see this amendment and, when the waiver finally comes as the kind of foundation for that kind of thing? Is it a quid pro quo in that sense, sir?
I wouldn't call it a quid pro quo, but Ro Khanna's amendment tracks the 2018 amendment. And there in 2018, it was clearly said that one of the determinants for a waiver will be to see if that particular country is making efforts to move away from its defense engagement with Russia.
Right.
And naturally, this is a requirement which the United States want. It would be, it would be curious if they were to give a waiver when the other country was going on expanding its relationship with Russia. So India has actually, for its own reasons, been diversifying from somewhere like 70% to about 58 to 60% dependence on Russia, and also increasing its purchases of US weaponry. So I think this is in tune with the requirements of the waiver provision. It's not a clear quid pro quo because I think India would make its choices according to its own national priorities. And it is in our own interest actually today to be diversifying our sources.
One final question, Ambassador, before I let you go, is, the unsung persons behind, the diplomatic process. We hardly ever see their faces. We usually do see the ambassador, but, obviously you've led large teams, and these are large teams involved, in the processes that lead to something like this. Tell us a little bit about that. How complicated is this whole thing? This is all about human engagement, sir.
It's very complicated, and I am not aware of the inside story on this particular move. But my broad understanding of the situation is that it is the Indian diaspora, the Indian-American diaspora, which is working towards strengthening India-United States partnership. It's grown in strength. It's about 4 million people now, and it's become increasingly mainstream. And you have several people in the Congress, you have them in the local governments, in the state representation, and these people are playing an important role. And of course, our diplomats, our ambassador and his team, which tend to the Congress by constant engagement, by making briefing people, by underlining the India-US story and motivating people to work towards it, they definitely play a very significant role.
This is the unfolding India-US story that goes to the next level. And I thank you very much, Ambassador Navteej Sarna, for helping us understand it. Who better than you to give us your perspective on this story? Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much.
And the fact is that the India-US relationship in the defense sphere has been going from strength to strength for 2 whole decades now. And it is in that context that this big waiver that India stands to get is going to make things even bigger. Watch this report. Take a look at every single piece of weaponry that the US has sold to India, with much more possibly in the pipeline. That jet Tom Cruise is flying is an FA-18 Super Hornet. Why are we showing you bits of a movie or trailer you've probably already watched, you're wondering? Well, because this American fighter jet has been officially on offer to India for well over a decade.
What the hell? Good morning, aviators.
The trusty backbone of the US Navy's carrier-based combat fleet, Super Hornets are one of the most prominent and long-running weaponry pitches to India, in this case the Indian Navy. While it isn't directly related, prospects for US weapons deals like the Super Hornet being successfully closed in India just got a huge boost, with the US clearing decks to provide India with a super unique waiver on sanctions for defense deals with adversary nations like Russia. In other words, a country that was trying to sell India big weapons while also threatening to sanction it has decided the latter bit just doesn't sit right, especially when dealing with a democracy like India. The upcoming sanctions waiver victory for India is seen by most as the obvious thing to do, given that India-US relations have always transcended partisan politics and the language of threat. Also, the India-US defense trade has been booming for 2 decades now. The most visible manifestations of this are in multi-billion-dollar deals for C-17 Globemaster heavy transport aircraft, C-130J Super Hercules medium transport aircraft, P-8I Poseidon long-range maritime reconnaissance aircraft, AH-64E Apache attack helicopters, CH-47 Chinook heavy-lift helicopters, M777 ultralight artillery guns, and even a pair of advanced Sea Guardian surveillance drones on lease to the Indian Navy. But these tens of billions of dollars of military hardware already supplied are well matched by what the US is hoping to push in the future. Projects that now stand boosted big time with the shadow of US sanctions being removed. Foremost is the pitch to build the latest version of the F-15 Eagle fighter in India for the Indian Air Force. And a large deal for up to 30 armed Sky Guardian drones for the 3 Indian armed forces, capable of precision strikes on targets. And potentially hundreds of engines for India's present and future fighter jets. It's been a steady reality for decades. Big bucks defense deals are sweeteners to international ties. And they very much have been to the India-US relationship. Bureau Report, India Today. So that's really a big part of what this entire sanction waiver is all about. But let me recap that for you, because this is ultimately about the nuts and bolts. It's about the dollars and cents and a huge unignorable diplomatic relationship between India and the United States. Take a look at the weapons that are on the table for India from the United States, and they have been for years now. The F-18 Super Hornet for the Indian Navy, the F-15 Eagle II for the Indian Air Force. At least 30 armed Sky Guardian drones are in the pipeline for the three Indian armed force, all the three armed services. You already have a huge number of C-17 Globemaster heavy transport aircraft in Indian Air Force service, like you do the US C-130J Super Hercules, very, very popular with the Indian Air Force. The P-8I Poseidon long-range maritime reconnaissance and submarine hunting aircraft, also of US origin. Then you've got the AH-64E Apache attack helicopters with the Indian Air Force, like you do the Chinook heavy lift helicopters, many of these already deployed in Ladakh. Then you've got the M777 ultralight artillery guns. So the India-US defense trade story is absolutely booming. And while we're talking about Ladakh, because remember, defense against China is a big part of this sanctions waiver that is being pushed for India. We're going to take you to Ladakh because the Dalai Lama, Tibetan spiritual leader, is there, and he's sent a strong message to China. Amidst this visit, India and China will be speaking for the 16th time on the Ladakh standoff in 2 days from now. Very, very significant. We'll get you a ground report from Ladakh next.
ये मेरा ही नहीं, आपका भी शो है, और इसीलिए मैंने आपसे पूछा था कि आज तक पर मेरे नए शो का नाम क्या होना चाहिए। और आप जानकर हैरान रह जाएंगे कि अब तक 3 लाख से ज्यादा लोग हमें अपने सुझाव भेज चुके हैं और अभी भी भेजते जा रहे हैं। और आप देख सकते हैं इन लाखों नामों की सूची इस समय मेरे सामने है, और इन लाखों नामों में से अगर आपको एक नाम चुनना हो तो उसमें थोड़ा समय तो लगेगा। इसलिए दिल थाम कर बैठिए, क्योंकि बहुत जल्द मैं आपको बताऊंगा मेरे नए शो का नाम। तब तक जुड़े रहिए मेरे साथ सिर्फ आज तक पर।
Is the monsoon season bringing relief to you from the hot summers? Well, what if we tell you that it can rain diamonds? Not certainly on Earth, but yes, it is raining diamonds on Uranus and Neptune. The temperature and pressure conditions on these planets are extreme. Due to this, carbon atoms can be crushed into diamonds. Uranus and Neptune are known by their unique blue shades. Both planets have a common condition to harden carbon atoms. But unfortunately, the inhospitable environment of the planet won't allow you to collect those diamonds. The blue color of these planets is due to methane. Methane has carbon in it. The carbon can be crushed by immense pressure that happens in the atmosphere. And when it gets hot and dense inside the planets, these diamonds are formed and accumulated. This causes them to rain in the atmosphere. Tell us what you think about this unique phenomena.
Everyone's busy finding what's trending. You're busy finding out why. India Today, for those who research before reacting. Download the India Today app now.
Tibetan spiritual leader Dalai Lama is on his first visit outside Dharamshala in the last 2 years. The spiritual leader who arrived in Jammu on Friday is now visiting Ladakh. The Dalai Lama received a very warm welcome by his followers there. This is his visit after the abrogation of Article 370 amidst tensions between India and China in Ladakh, which have been on for more than 2 years now. The Dalai Lama, discussing the expansionist policy of the Chinese side in Ladakh, says India and China should resolve this problem through talks and peaceful means. He says that the use of military force is outdated. His words come 2 days before India and China are scheduled to meet for the 16th time on the standoff on Sunday. Speaking in Jammu, the Dalai Lama had hit a conciliatory note with China, saying that he is not seeking independence but meaningful autonomy for Tibet with the preservation of Buddhist culture. Asked about China's objections to his visit, the Dalai Lama said that the objection wasn't from the Chinese people who are showing interest in Tibetan Buddhism.
India and China, most populated two nations and neighbor. Sooner or later, you have to solve this problem through talk, through peaceful means. Use military force is outdated. Now more and more Chinese now realize Dalai Lama not seeking independence, but within China, within People's Republic of China, meaningful autonomy and Tibetan Buddhist culture preserved. Not Chinese people. Some Chinese hardliner, they consider me splittist and reactionary, so always criticize me.
His Holiness दलाई लामा जी अभी शे के जो जीवेत्सल एरिया है यहाँ पे उनका रेजिडेंस है, तो यहाँ पे आमंत्रित कर चुके हैं और His Holiness दलाई लामा जी ने जो यहाँ के लोगों को संबोधित करते हुए ये आश्वासन दिया कि आने वाले दिनों में कुछ दिन रेस्ट करने के बाद बुद्धावलोकित शौर्य के प्रवचन देंगे और शांति देवा आचार्य शांति देवा के जो बोधिचर्या अवतारा है उसके जो विजडम वाला पार्ट है उसका भी टीचिंग्स देंगे।
उसका नियत खराब है कि दलाई लामा जी यहाँ पर आके चीन के खिलाफ कुछ ना कुछ प्रचार करके जो ना तनाज़ा निकाला जाए, ये उनका सोच है, लेकिन ये बिल्कुल भी नहीं है। दलाई लामा जी यहाँ पर आते हैं तो सिर्फ बुद्धिज़्म के बारे में प्रचार करते हैं, अमन में रहो, शांति रहो और किसी को दुख मत दो।
And Ashraf Wani is India Today's man on the ground in Ladakh. He's been talking to the people of Ladakh. He's spoken to the Dalai Lama and gotten us all those very important reactions. Ashraf, very significant, the words of the Dalai Lama coming 2 days before India and China will be holding their 16th round of talks in Ladakh as well.
Absolutely, Shiv, and basically you know well even that how much Dalai Lama irritates in the Chinese eyes and particularly the Chinese establishment. That is what he said, that he is not liked by the Chinese people but is loved by the Tibetan people particularly, because he is not only the leader of the Tibet in exile but in fact followed by the thousands and thousands of people all across this region. Particularly if we talk about the Ladakh, he is the frequent visitor of Ladakh, but due to the COVID and other things he could not visit for last 4 years, and at the age of 87 when today he landed in Leh here in the Ladakh, and we have seen how the whole this region was on roads for welcoming him. Now he will be for 1 month here in the Ladakh region and particularly in Leh, and will be doing the many programs which are lined up for him. But main focus of the Dalai Lama will be the meditation as well as the spirituality and the religious affairs, where he will preach and address the gatherings of the people here in the Ladakh. But the statement what he said, what you are talking about, is the statement what has been made by the Dalai Lama ahead of this crucial meeting between China and India on LAC. Mainly, I spoke to many people. Many people believe that probably still that China is not in the mood where they are going to vacate those no-man lands where they have illegally occupied in some parts on line of actual control. India completely wants that these all matters should be resolved in the dialogue what Dalai Lama has also advocated, and but the main thing will be when China will accept these things and they will be finally shaped.
There have been 16 rounds of talks, so we'll have to see how this one actually goes. It's been nearly 2.5 years since the standoff in Ladakh, the world's biggest military standoff, has been on for Ashraf in Ladakh. Thank you very much for joining us, Ashraf, on that story. Meanwhile, a war of a completely different kind in India's national capital. A huge showdown has erupted days before the monsoon session of Parliament, a day after a huge backlash that we covered here on 5 Live on the banned words in Parliament, or the words that you cannot use that won't go on the record. The opposition today highlighted another gag notice of no dharna, strike or performing puja inside Parliament premises. The government has taken the pains to show that advisories of this kind have been issued from time to time for many, many years now by successive governments, but this time it has become a big political firestorm. Congress netas, while slamming the Modi government, have fired dharna mana hai attacks. Trinamool MP Derek O'Brien also dared the government, saying there's no stopping us. Well, after the order by the Rajya Sabha Secretariat, Trinamool MP Mahua Maitra was quick to take a dig at Prime Minister Modi, criticizing the order and saying that it was the Prime Minister who performed a puja atop the new proposed Parliament building. The BJP has taken on all of these opposition netas, saying the same order was circulated in 2009 under the UPA government and nothing was new in this order issued by the Rajya Sabha Secretariat. It had been selectively picked up, amplified and distorted for political gains. The opposition has been strongly protesting the moves, saying it will impede their ability to critique the government.
एक तो 1,500 लफ्ज को हटा दिया, बोलने का इजाजत बंद कर दिए जा रहे हैं। फिर कहते हैं कि धरना प्रदर्शन नहीं होंगे। प्राइम मिनिस्टर की अपना आवास स्थल में हम जा नहीं सकते, लेकिन पार्लियामेंट और उनका प्रीसिंक्ट जो चौहद्दी की बात होते हैं, उनका जो दायरा होते हैं, वो तो सबका है। हम सब उनका स्टेक होल्डर है। एक के बाद एक घोर अन्याय होते जा रहे हैं।
You have a list of words that cannot be pronounced in Parliament. It will be expunged. They are hiding behind the context reason. Who decides what the context for Jumla GV will be? 15 lakh बैंक अकाउंट में आएंगे, 2 करोड़ रोजगार होगा, रुपया 40 पर पहुंच जाएगा. The rupee is breaching 80. Why is the Prime Minister conspicuously silent? So was that a Jumla or not a Jumla? Within the House, outside the House, you cannot protest. Why does he not declare once and for all that we are suspending all civil liberties and we are pronouncing that India is no longer a democracy?
ये सब शुरुआत है, आगे चलकर ये लोकतंत्र पर बंदिश लगा देंगे कि आप लोकतंत्र का नाम नहीं ले सकते, आप संविधान का दुहाई नहीं दे सकते, आप धर्मनिरपेक्षता की बात नहीं कर सकते, सद्भाव की बात नहीं कर सकते। तो ये तो भारतीय जनता पार्टी उसी रास्ते पर चल रही है।
बीते दिनों पहले एक असंसदीय शब्दावली की एक नई सूची आई। वो अपने आप में एक तकरीबन मैं कहूंगा कि एक ऐसी मनोवृत्ति का परिचय है कि लोकतांत्रिक मूल्यों और प्रतिरोध की पूरी संस्कृति को आप खत्म करना चाहते हैं। शब्द भी आप लोगों को चुनने नहीं देंगे। अब ये पार्लियामेंट्री बुलेटिन आई। संसद में परिसर में लोग धरना नहीं दे सकते, प्रदर्शन नहीं कर सकते, अनशन नहीं कर सकते, क्या साहब रामधुन तक नहीं गा सकते। मैं समझता हूं कि माननीय स्पीकर साहब और माननीय चेयरमैन साहब को फौरी तौर पर हस्तक्षेप करके इस तरह की तमाम कोशिशें जो संसदीय लोकतंत्र को कब्रगाह में भेजने की तैयारी हो रही है, इस पर विराम लगना चाहिए। अन्यथा वो दिन दूर नहीं है कि दबाने की मनोवृत्ति की वजह से जो श्रीलंका में विस्फोट हुआ, संभवतः हम उसी दिशा में आगे बढ़ जाएंगे।
ये प्रक्रिया अनेकों वर्षों से 1954 से चला आ रहा है और 2010 के बाद ये सालाना प्रक्रिया है। मुझे आश्चर्य होता है कि हर विषय में इसी प्रकार देश में एक भ्रम की स्थिति उत्पन्न करके एक अशांत वातावरण बनाने का प्रयास जो विपक्ष और खास करके कांग्रेस पार्टी करती है, आज हम सब देख रहे हैं। कांग्रेस को माफी मांगनी चाहिए कि वो जिस प्रकार बरगला रही थी देश को, आज कहीं न कहीं उनका झूठ पकड़ा गया है।
मेरा सभी राजनीतिक दलों से पुनः आग्रह है कि लोकसभा में या राज्य की विधानसभाओं में बिना तथ्यों के किसी भी तरह की राजनीतिक आरोप प्रत्यारोप से हमें बचना चाहिए। हमारी कोशिश होनी चाहिए लोकतांत्रिक संस्थाओं को सशक्त करने का, सभी राजनीतिक दलों को कोशिश करना चाहिए, क्योंकि सभी राजनीतिक लोकतांत्रिक संस्थाएं चाहे राज्य की हो चाहे केंद्र की हो, वो जवाबदेही से काम करती है। उनकी कोशिश होती है कि माननीय सदस्य अपनी बात की अभिव्यक्ति स्वतंत्रता की अभिव्यक्ति उनको है, उसको सदन में सार्थक रूप।
Meanwhile, there's a fresh twist to the controversy over former Vice President Hamid Ansari and what the BJP says are links to a Pakistani spy journalist Nusrat Mirza. Now remember, these are links that former Vice President Hamid Ansari has denied in full. But the chairman of the All India Bar Association, one of the co-organizers of one of these events in question, Adish Agarwala, has made a sensational claim. He says that there was an international conference on terrorism which was attended by Hamid Ansari and the Pakistani journalist, and they chose not to disclose it. Agarwala alleges that Hamid Ansari and his friends were fraternizing with Pakistani journalist Nusrat Mirza at the Jama Masjid United Forum's conference. The BJP has trained its guns officially on Hamid Ansari today and alleged that he's just concealing his association with a man who confesses that he used to pass on information from India to the ISI. Hamid Ansari has issued a brief statement today saying he has not met Nusrat Mirza in any way, not invited him, and stands by his statement. Ansari has denied all allegations, saying he's never met this man and says it's a litany of falsehoods that have been unleashed on him personally.
वो कहता है कि इंसिस्टेंस थी वाइस प्रेसिडेंट की और जब नहीं बुलाया गया 2010 में the then vice president Hamid Ansari ji expressed displeasure, नाराज हुए। कांग्रेस की सरकार के वरिष्ठ मंत्री मंच साझा कर रहे हैं, तो क्या यह वाजिब सवाल नहीं है जो भारत की जनता आपसे पूछती है कि ऐसे व्यक्ति को वीजा क्यों दिया गया? वो भारत में आके यहां पे रेकी करता है, जानकारी लेता है और उसके बाद उस जानकारी का इस्तेमाल भारत में आतंकवाद को बढ़ावा देने के लिए किया जाता है। हामिद अंसारी जी ने सारा ठीकरा कांग्रेस की सरकार के ऊपर यह कह के फोड़ा कि जो फॉरेन डिग्निटरीज उपराष्ट्रपति के कार्यक्रम में बुलाए जाते हैं, ये सरकार की सलाह से बुलाए जाते हैं।
Quite obvious from the picture that the statement that Mr. Hamid Ansari put out was economical with truth. He's clearly trying to conceal his association with Nusrat Mirza, whose video claiming that he was spying in India and was passing on information to ISI has come to light. Now the question is that why is Mr. Ansari doing it? And why would he want to show that he had no association with him?
And my colleague Akshita spoke to the chairman of the All India Bar Association that he claims, Adish Agarwala, over Hamid Ansari's alleged links with this Pakistani spy. He alleges that Ansari attended a conference on terrorism back in 2009 in Delhi with Nusrat Mirza. Once again, let me remind you that Hamid Ansari has not come on camera, but he's issued 2 statements completely denying and rubbishing all of these charges.
Dr. Agarwal, you've spoken about him not attending finally. The Pakistani journalist didn't attend. A picture that you've put out shows the Pakistani journalist Nusrat Mirza on the same dais with the former vice president. Your contention says that this is from another conference?
No,
can you give us details about this picture?
Friends, it was in 27th October 2009.
Okay.
It was organized by Jama Masjid United Front in Oberoi Hotel. And when my name was it was told by Congress and the president, he came in this program and we invited him. That's why I was compelled to do research. And I found that the Honorable Vice President was sharing the dais with the Pak journalist in that conference organized by Jama Masjid United Front. And as a matter of fact, why Honorable Vice President is telling that he attended our conference, this journalist, because that conference organized by Jama Masjid United Front was illegal. Because when international conference is being organized, a permission has to be obtained from Home Ministry and Ministry of External Affairs. And because this was for Muslims organized, and the purpose of that conference was to dispel the doubt that Muslims are creating terrorism, developing terrorism. That was the main purpose of holding that, because that statement was made by Mr. Kapil Sibal about 10 days before when that conference was organized. So they have not sought any permission from Ministry of External Affairs, Ministry of Home Affairs, and the President and Vice President. They are supposed to seek clearance from these ministries. And rightly, the Honorable Vice President had told that he is attending, he is invited, he is accepting request once the such conferences are cleared by government, Ministry of External Affairs, Home Ministry. Our conference was cleared by Home Ministry, Law Ministry, and Ministry of External Affairs. So he pointed out that a journalist attended our conference. Intentionally he made this averment, because that other conference was totally illegal and it was not proper on the part of the Honorable Vice President to attend a conference which is not cleared by the government.
And my team tells me this show isn't complete without Bollywood's newest BFFs on the Coffee with Karan couch. Sara and Janvi spilling the beans, and a lot more is the story I've got lined up for you after this very short break. Don't miss it.
She told us this, that you all bring out like an obscene side. Watch out.
Sara, give me a name of a boy you feel.
आ गई? कैसा रहा दिन?
बहुत अच्छा।
कोई वीडियो गेम कवर करने गई थी ना?
वीडियो गेम नहीं माँ, ई-स्पोर्ट्स।
ई-स्पोर्ट्स?
माँ, ई-स्पोर्ट्स is just like any other competitive sport. इसमें ना वो सब फीलिंग्स है जो किसी भी और स्पोर्ट्स में है। इसमें इमोशन है, इसमें एंगर है, इसमें सैडनेस है, इसमें हैप्पीनेस है, इसमें कमराडरी है। ये सिर्फ गेम नहीं, ये ई स्पोर्ट्स का प्रीमियर लीग ESPL है।
You are watching India Today.
The latest episode of Coffee with Karan Season 7 was a platter full of spilled beans by Bollywood stars Sara Ali Khan and Janhvi Kapoor with a drizzle of cheese, apparently. Listen more to this report.
Janhvi Kapoor and Sara Ali Khan are in the house. Namaste darshako to you.
Bollywood's newest BFFs are spilling the coffee beans and how.
Obscene sighting. Watch out.
Sara Ali Khan and Janhvi Kapoor gave copious amounts of fodder for gossip during their Coffee with Karan appearance.
मेरी जिंदगी में सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट चीज मेरा करियर है। What happened? सिर्फ एक इंसान के साथ रहना, उसी के लिए वो वाली फीलिंग लाना नेचुरल थोड़ी है।
The Love Aajkal star had a sassy answer for Kejo when asked why her ex is her ex.
Because he's everyone's ex.
From the ex and on to the next, Sara Ali Khan did not shy away from confessing to her massive crush on South heartthrob Vijay Deverakonda.
Sara, give me a name of a boy you feel like you want to date today. Just
No.
just
Vijay Deverakonda.
Like a quintessential filmy plot twist, Sara insinuated that something was cooking between her bestie Janhvi and Vijay.
You with Vijay Deverakonda.
Do you like Vijay? What is this?
The girls served some piping hot tea on the coffee couch when they hinted at a possible link-up between Rashmika Mandanna and Vijay. Battling it out for the coffee hamper, the starlets revealed they have the hots for Ranveer Singh, Ranbir Kapoor, Vicky Kaushal and Varun Dhawan. And in a controversial declaration, Sara said that marriage is definitely not a deal breaker.
So many people have actually told us this, that y'all bring out like an obscene sighting. Watch out.
Sara and Janhvi gushed about their girls' trip to Kedarnath, stalking exes who are brothers and late-night conversations. Ingredients for that perfect brew of friendship.
And you keep mentioning...
We hope that Sara and Janhvi keep this cup of coffee steaming, fresh and hot. With Tanushree Mundli, Bureau Report, India Today.
And finally, we the idiots of Earth. Seriously, viewer, as I bring this week to a close, I wanted to share a thought with you about how small I've been feeling and how small we all should really be feeling in light of the amazing, life-changing photographs that dropped this week from NASA's brand new James Webb Space Telescope. While a tiny patch of planet Earth has been fighting about Kali posters and Ashoka's lions, this telescope was busy photographing the oldest detected light in the universe. Just as some of us were grappling over hate speech and rioters and namaz in malls, this telescope had its gaze fixed 2,500 light years away at the stunning nebulae in our world, where stars are born. There's nothing like humanity's amazing gaze up into space to remind us of how small, incredibly insignificant we really are. So as we get busy lurching from one earthly, idiotic controversy to another, I leave you with our two realities. One at our doorstep, the other so many worlds away. And the words of physicist Stephen Hawking: we are just an advanced breed of monkeys on a minor planet of a very average star. But we can understand the universe, and that makes us something very special. May we never forget that. And since we are still very much on Earth, coming up next, Pooja has the big showdown over namaz at Lucknow's Lulu Mall. It's apparently all set to become an even bigger controversy, with Hindu groups seeking to recite the Hanuman Chalisa inside the mall after a video of a small group of people conducting namaz inside the mall has gone viral. That's next with Pooja.
DigiYatra is going to be implemented in India from 31st August. It will allow passengers to catch their flight quickly if they are in a hurry. So basically, the DigiYatra allows facial recognition technology or biometric-based digital processing of passengers done at the airport. It will be functional at the airports of 7 states: Delhi, Bengaluru, Hyderabad, Varanasi, Vijayawada, Kolkata and Pune. They would not have to provide their identity cards or boarding pass at different checkpoints, including the entry, security checks, and the aircraft boarding. It will also facilitate a self-backdrop. The initiative is expected to be a paperless, centralized registration system. The government ID repositories, airport security systems, and airline back-end network would be integrated together. A mobile application will also be launched by the Ministry of Civil Aviation.